verse 36. It says, Hashem nasan athlena am beinei Mitzrayim. God found the favor of the people in the eyes of the Egyptians. Vayashilum vayinatzlum es Mitzrayim. And they lent them their vessels and they emptied Egypt. Vayinatzlu es Mitzrayim. Rashi says they lent them even those things that they didn't, even those things which they didn't ask, the Egyptians would give to them. The Egyptian would say, you said you want one, take two. Because they were so afraid and they want, why? The question is why? And the answer is they were so afraid of the Jewish people, they wanted them out of there so badly. They wanted them to leave. Anything for them to go. The Talmud records, I think it's in, you have to remember where it is. Maybe it's in Baba Basra. I forget the exact place. That the later on, the Egyptians came hundreds of years later and said to the Jewish people, give us back the objects you took from us. And what did the Jewish people say? Give us back our lost wages. You didn't pay us all those years. And you're not gonna beat the Jews in an argument. So that was the point.
What do you think of this? I mean, this look a little ugly for the Jews.
In what sense?
Well, I mean, you could make the case. Obviously, there's a rough justice to it, slave, and so they have to get their honor. But there's a little bit of a sense of extortion, right? They can leave. God's on their side. Give us whatever you want.
Well, so that's what I think the Talmud was hinting to, like that. Not saying anything, God forbid, harsh towards you. I'm just saying that the idea that the Jewish people were not justified in taking these objects is, I mean, they were living through Pharaoh murdering their children and working them hard. So they were entitled to take stuff when they left.
Yeah, I see that.
I brought it up, Rabbi. 791.
It has to do with, it's almost like
It's just, I respect, obviously I respect the Talmudic explanation, but it feels like a little bit, it's not vigilantism in the sense of physical violence, but it's a sense of we're going to get justice. They were terribly mistreated, so they're going to take a lot of stuff. And you could certainly say, well, why shouldn't they?
I mean, once you're going to go start. Hi, Yoav, how you doing? We're in chapter 12, verse 36. Once you're going to go down the road of feeling bad for the Egyptians, then I wouldn't start there. So why is he killing all the firstborn? What about the devastating Nile? Ecological disaster, the frogs. I mean, God really need to strike the lice upon the people. And, so there's a lot of harshness here. In these plagues. There's no question there's harshness in these plagues. And that's because sometimes you need to be harsh in order to break the bondage. I was also thinking about it today. We're doing the tractate of the Sanhedrin. So it's talking about lashes and execution. And the question is, somebody asked me, one of our students, who said, which is the more humane way? Giving them lashes if they steal, which is what they did in biblical times, Talmudic times, or putting the man in prison for 5 to 10 years. So which is the more humane way?
I've got lashes. Get it over with and go make your life.
Wait. You would, if you were the prisoner or if you were the prosecutor?
If I were the prisoner. And if I were the prosecutor, I would say I have more of a chance of changing the person's behavior. If there's an immediate punishment, I would go up and send him out. And if I'm the prisoner, I would say, do not want in jail 5 years.
Yeah, the modern concept of criminal justice is so foreign to the Torah and to the Talmud. There's nothing at all remotely similar to long-term imprisonment of human beings and the prisons for hire, the private prison system. There's nothing even remotely similar to that. The Torah speaks about execution for the most heinous crimes, lashes, and restitution of the payment. And then. Right, that's it.
No rehabilitation of
Where's there rehabilitation? There's no rehabilitation here, that's for sure. Yeah, so where's yeah, there is rehabilitation in the Torah. If you steal, you can't pay it back, you're an indentured servant, you have to live in the home of the person. You move into somebody's home and that person watches over you and you gotta be his worker. So that's you move into a home with somebody.
And isn't restitution part of Yom Kippur that you can't just say, I'm sorry to God. You can't just say, gee, I wish I hadn't done that. You have to go to the person and you have to apologize to them and make right what you did. And that to me that's the atonement. That's the if I stole $50 from you, I can't go tell him I did it. I tell you I did it.
You have to pay it back.
An eye for an eye.
I have to give it back.
Oh, an eye for an eye. So the rabbis, even though the Bible talks about an eye for an eye, the rabbis refrain from that. The rabbis say it's not literal. It's monetary. Oh, Kobe, or yours. The rabbis are reluctant to call it literal.
They
Because
come later than when that concept was floated.
I'm sorry?
The rabbis come later. When
Yeah, so the rabbis are certainly well after the
Sure.
text of the Torah, and that's their oral law, the oral interpretation. But rabbinic Judaism does not see this concept of an eye for an eye, but it is the literal text of the Torah, but the rabbis reject that as something that's impossible. Because that means if you strike the eye of a blind person, then you're not punished, or if if a blind person strikes the eye of someone and makes him blind, so then he faces no punishment. And Shakespeare already talked about this in Shylock and Merchant of Venice. How are you going to have a pound of flesh? How is it going to be exactly a pound? There's going to be a lot of consequences. If you take out a pound of flesh, the guy's going to die from the blood. Did they study that book with you, Colby, in school, Merchant of Venice?
that's portions.
Probably becoming more popular nowadays as the anti-Semitism grows.
There's an argument, it really wasn't. It's
About Merchant of Venice.
quite
Well,
sympathetic in some of this too.
yeah, I mean, I would say,
Australian, drop this from the jungle. From heaven to the place beneath this twice plus that's. Shylock.
Need to not bleed.
to beat fish with off, if you prick him, will not bleed.
Yeah, right.
But the point is, we're talking about whether or not the Merchant of Venice is anti-Semitic. It's really not. It's really anachronistic to talk about a writer. What was Shakespeare? The 15th century, 16th century. Talking about anti-Semitic. Everybody grew up with that. Like the idea that you weren't anti-Semitic. I mean, that was the culture of viewing the Jew as a dangerous element of society, and to the extent that he could, Shakespeare made Shylock somewhat sympathetic to a certain degree.
Well, the play is set in Venice because Jews weren't legally allowed England at the time.
Certainly interesting book, interesting play. Okay, so I'm sure there's some theories that Shakespeare was Jewish. Anybody argue that? They've got to. I think they have DNA evidence now that Columbus was Jewish.
Trouble finding.
Did you see that? Did anybody see that?
There's some debate about that, but.
No, they recently DNA.
Yeah.
You saw that. Columbus. Now that he's canceled, they say he's Jewish. Okay, so verse 37. Oh, wait, Rabbi Yosef brought up the text. Now, Rabbi Yosef, I don't know if you could see the cross references here. You brought up from Sanhedrin 91a.
Yeah,
But there's an earlier source in the Gemara than Sanhedrin. If you see the cross references, but anyway, I'll read it. Go up a little bit. So anyway, I don't have to read that text, but basically, the Egyptian people said to Alexander of Macedonia, "Go get us the silver and gold that the Jews took from us." The Jews argued back, "Give us our wages, and we'll return to you the silver and gold." Okay. Vayisu b'nei Yisrael, verse 37. Vayisu b'nei Yisrael mi Ramses. The Jewish people traveled from Ramses Sukkosa. To Sukkot, Kishesh Meod Elef Raglei Agvarim Lavamitav. There were 600,000 aside from the babies. So,
And women, right? Because Taf
Yeah.
includes women also, usually.
well,
In
for sure it's a
Parashat
sign.
Pinchas, it says B'chol Taf banashim, right? So,
Well, I would say
it's,
for sure it doesn't count the women because it says 600,000 men.
yeah.
And that's men above 20 and older. But first Rashi says from Ramses to Sukkos, it was a distance of 120 mil, and they came there instantly. As God says, I'll carry you on the wings of Nisharim. It's interesting. I think this is such an overlooked source that the very first place the Jewish people traveled to after they left Egypt, the very first place they traveled was this place called Sukkot. Big question is, when we sit in Sukkot on the holiday, why are we sitting in Sukkot? Where does it say, Kibu Sukkot Hoshavti et Bnei Israel? I caused you to dwell in Sukkot when I took you out of Egypt. But it never says that they lived in huts. They lived in tents. So it's possible that this is the reference, that the first place we went to was Sukkot on our journey out.
It was an Egypt.
Well, it was kind of on the outskirts because Rashi here says it was 120 miles.
I think it's Goshen. I think that's where it's located.
Well, it's
About the right distance.
it's a little tricky because it doesn't say it's Goshen. It seems like anyway, whatever it is, it's called Sukkot here, and that's it's like precursor to the holiday, or reminds us of the holiday of Sukkot. The first place we traveled was Sukkot. So on Sukkot, we're really kind of reflecting back on the holiday, the first of the holidays. Okay, now
They have over 1 million people.
Oh, sure. If they have 600,000 men between the ages of 20 and 60,
Yeah, more than 1 million.
so presumably they have the same number of women around that, and then you have all these people under the age of 20 and over the age of 60. So it's probably a group of like several million. And that in itself is a question. Can you imagine like several million people traveling? I don't know how many people you saw, like some people going back into North Gaza today. How many people went back in there? I don't know. But it wasn't several million, and it's a big thing. The travel, the logistics. You have traffic jams, you have people schlepping stuff, you don't move so quickly. And here they are, there's 600,000 men. But Rashi has an answer to these questions. Rashi says the Jewish people were carried on Kanfei Nisharim, on the wings. Usually Nisharim is translated in modern Hebrew, it's an eagle. People argue that in biblical Hebrew, it might not have been an eagle, but it might have been a vulture. Anybody here ever see a vulture? It's a really, the turkey vulture sometimes comes into Shepherd Park.
They're pretty nasty.
That is a giant, ugly looking bird. That might be the ugliest bird I've ever seen. I see that vulture, and even though I'm inside, I shiver. That turkey vulture. Have you ever seen one, a turkey vulture? You see a turkey vulture, run the other way. Okay. Now we have a controversial verse. Verse 38. V'gam erev rav alaitam v'tzonu v'akar miknei kavemon. In addition to the 600,000 men, and aside from the children, etc., the erev rav came up with them. And with them were sheep and cattle and a lot of livestock. Who are this erev rav? Erev rav is a great mixture. So Rashi says, Taruvos umos shalgerim. This is a mixture of other nations, Rashi says, who were converts. But there's an alternative text here where it states a mixture of other nations with the Egyptians. So this is a mixture of other nations who latched themselves onto the Jewish people. Rashi is going to, this is going to play a very big part in Rashi's commentary, because anytime that Bnei Yisrael sin, Rashi will blame it on these people. It's not the people who are the children of Israel themselves, it's the people who latched onto them. And Rashi blames Moshe for taking them along. He should have known not to take them. God says to him, you're the one who brought the Erev Rav. That's why there was the sin of the golden calf. Those are the people who complained. Those are the people who instigated problems. It was the Erev Rav. This mixture. It's nice to blame others.
Not the spies.
The spies is a little bit of an issue because the spies are the princes. So, but it all started with the golden calf. That was what keyed everybody off. The golden calf was from the Erev Rav. Rashi says it was the Erev Rav. Vayofuat habatzek. Kobe, you ever see a turkey vulture? We were talking about that. Okay, vayofuat habatzek. They baked the dough. Asher hotzil mitzrayim. They baked the dough, which they let out from Egypt. Ugot matzot. These are cakes of matzos. Kilo chametz. For the matzot did not become chametz, is leavened. Kigorshu mitzrayim. Because they were driven from Egypt. V'lo yachul et mamea. And they weren't able to tarry. V'gam tzeda lo asu lahem. They also didn't make provisions. This is also a tricky verse. It says they baked the dough that they let out, and it was flat bread, unleavened bread, because they were driven out and they didn't have time to wait, and also they had no provisions. The big question everybody asks is, what do you mean they didn't have time? They knew about this for 2 weeks. At the beginning of chapter 12, God says what to do on the eve of Pesach, to slaughter the Paschal lamb, and you're going to take out matzah and the Paschal lamb. And now all of a sudden they didn't have time? What do you mean they didn't have time? So Rashi says, what's ugot matzot? Harara shel matzah, a cake of matzah. A dough that does not leaven is called matzah. And also say that they didn't have provisions for the journey. Rashi reads this as praise of the children of Israel, because they didn't say, how can we go into the wilderness? Where are we going to eat? Rather, they believed in God's word and went. As it states in the prophets in Jeremiah, and we read this on Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, I remember the kindness of your youth, Zacharti l'chassan u'rayach, ava ku'otach, the love of your, when you were a bride, you followed me in the wilderness in a land that was not yet sown. And this is the Bnei Yisrael. Rashi says that this verse speaks to the greatness of the children of Israel. They didn't say, oh, wait, we have to go to Costco before we can go into the wilderness. We have to go shopping. We're not ready. We need a pack. They didn't pack. They just went. They just went. When you have such a call, like an emergency call, you have an opportunity, you don't even wait. Don't wait. They just picked up and left.
Except they gathered up all the gold and silver.
That was yesterday. Yeah. You're right. That's a little bit. At first, they got the gold and silver. Steve, got to give them a break a little.
Yeah, I mean, you need some.
You need something to bribe the guards with. I mean, you got to have a little gold, a little.
And you can't eat gold or silver.
You can't eat gold and silver. And what are they going to buy with it? There's no supermarkets there.
I'm more interested in where they got the water.
Well, we know where they got the water. They had the well of Miriam. And it says they complained about.
Talking about the first part of the Exodus.
They came to
120 miles close.
Yeah.
What are you drinking?
A couple million people.
They came to the springs. We'll see. You'll see what it is. They water is that's what's going to ultimately be the undoing of Moshe when they complained to him about the water. But we're going to get right after they come out of the off to the sea. It says they went 3 days and they couldn't find water, and then they complained to Moshe and Mara. So that's the first thing that was the problem. So they must have had water with them when they left. So what does the verse tell us? Or maybe it was raining where they were. They weren't. Yeah, why not? But at this point, they're 120 mil away. Okay, so what happens now? It says Moshav b'nei Yisrael Asher Yashvu b'Mitzrayim, and the dwelling places of the habitation of the children of Israel, where they lived in Egypt, was 30 years. Shloshim shana v'arba me'ot shana. They were 430 years in Egypt. This is a big problem also. Rashi has a big problem with this. Why does Rashi have such a huge problem with this? Because, hold on. Rashi has such a huge problem with, hold on 1 second. Rashi has a huge problem with this because the numbers don't work out. 430 years, but Moshe's mother went down to Egypt, and Moshe was 80 years old when he went out. So how do you get 430 years? If Yocheved gave birth to Moshe when she was 350, that doesn't make sense. Nobody gives birth at 350. Even Sarah was 90. So it doesn't make sense. So therefore, Rashi has different calculations. Rashi says, ultimately, I'll tell you, Rashi says we go back 400 years comes from the time that Isaac was born until now. It's 430 years from the birth of Isaac until now. Not 430 years from when they entered Egypt. And Rashi calculates this. He says, Achar Shara Yeshivot Sheyashvu Gerim Be'eretz Olam. After the other dwellings which they lived as foreigners, 430 years. This was the sum total of all the years. Hello there, my friends. Hello there. This was the sum total of all the years. From the moment Yitzchak was born until now, it was 400 years. It was 400 years from the moment Yitzchak was born until now. From when Abraham offspring, and they fulfilled the verse, your children will be a foreigner. And then there were 30 additional years from the decree of the Bein HaBetarim, from the time of the covenant until Isaac was born. So that's how you get to 430 years. And you can't say that they spent 430 years in Egypt because Kahas, the grandfather of Moshe, came to Egypt with Jacob. And so you calculate all these years, and all the years of Avram, it doesn't work. Moshe was 80 and when he led them out. And so therefore you have to say Kahat was many years, of course, before he went down to Egypt. And there were many years of Amram's overlapping with Kahaz, and Moshe's 80 years also overlapped with Amram. So you won't find 400 years since they came to Egypt. It's impossible. And so therefore it has to say that when they were, from the time Isaac was born, they were foreigners even in the land of Canaan. That's what Rashi needs to say. That's meaning to say from that moment was the decree. So,
and his last statement is that that's how they translate it in the Septuagint,
right.
Which I don't speak ancient Greek, but I finally saw it in a English translation that's from the Greek, where it says in Mitzrayim and in other lands, Mish'ar Aratzot.
Well, so the interesting thing is that if you look at what Rabbi Yosef is referring to, the Gemara Megillah talks about how the Egyptian king Ptolemy asked the sages to translate the Torah into Greek, and the sages made certain changes because there was a problem with the text, like it wasn't politically correct. But those changes, we have to look at them up, but those changes are not reflected in the Septuagint. Or maybe one or two of them are, but most of them are not. There's a different version of the Septuagint. So that was, did I check it personally? No, but when I studied Greek in college, I took Latin for 4 years and Greek only for 1 year, which is not enough. Don't ask me, I know nothing. I remember nothing. But my Greek professor, who was an amazing man, a huge scholar, he told me that they didn't match, that the version of the Septuagint that we have doesn't reflect these changes that the rabbis put in. So his name was Professor Louis Feldman of blessed memory. He was just one of the greatest teachers. He would say, you could call me anytime, day or night. And he would give us these impossible sentences to translate from Greek into English. And I'm like, so I remember calling him, he said, anytime. So one time I called him around like midnight. And he picks up on the first ring. I said, I'm trying to read the sentence you gave me to translate. And it says, the elephant was standing on the mouse's ear. It says, yes, that's exactly right. I'm like, I'll tell you one other thing. We'll stop the recording here with David Mincha. I'll just tell you. And then they had to